President Trump, I think, will be furious that he's lost, but just as furious that two of the justices he appointed in his first term joined the majority to vote down his tariff. So that's Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch. Both, it was a 6-3 split decision, you see.
Welcome back for the final part of the show. We've got our political panel, but we also have this breaking news story that we heard from Tom Noonan, which is involving the Supreme Court ruling against Donald Trump's tariffs. So we have got some reaction to that as well. But let me introduce our political panel to begin with. Freddie Gray, Deputy Editor of The Spectator and editor of, very helpfully, its US edition. Hello, Freddie.
Hello, Ayesha. How are you?
Good to have you with us, and welcome to the show, the political editor at Politics Joe, Ava Santina-Evans. Hello, Ava.
Hi, good afternoon.
Can I just get a sentence from both of you quickly just on your immediate reaction to this ruling, and then we're going to be speaking with David Charter. Freddie, I'll come to you first.
Well, it's exactly what Donald Trump didn't want. His administration have been worrying about this for a very long time, and the news is in, and it's not good. I don't think it's quite as fatal as some of its critics think it is, but it's a very serious setback for the Trump economic agenda.
Thank you. We'll come back to you, Freddie. Ava, your initial thoughts on this?
I'm going to disagree with Freddie this early on in the programme. I'm going to say this actually could be very helpful for Donald Trump, because this sort of enforces the narrative that he loves to push, that the Democrats do not care about the American people, and he was trying to do something that would help them, and that has now been thwarted. So this might play out well for him as the year goes on.
Interesting. Good to have two different views. Let's now bring in David Charter, who is our editor, our US editor for the Times in America. David, tell us what's your reaction to this?
Hello. Yeah. Well, I think this is an earthquake that was expected. The tremors had been felt coming by the White House. They've been busily preparing for an adverse ruling, because when they had hearings on this, it did seem that some of the judges were very sceptical. President Trump, I think, will be furious that he's lost, but just as furious that two of the justices he appointed in his first term joined the majority to vote down his tariff. So that's Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch. Both, it was a 6-3 split decision, you see. One of the ones he appointed, Justice Kavanaugh, said that he thought the emergency legislation used by Trump was okay, and he should be able to do it. So there is a split decision, which will we can expect Donald Trump to exploit and riff off that later today, no doubt. And I think we will hear later from the White House that they've got alternative ways of trying to keep the money rolling in, because it really is the fundamental strategy of Donald Trump to raise billions of dollars from tariffs, and he will look to replace it. So I don't know whether British exporters listening in will get a lot of relief. I'm afraid we still don't know. Unfortunately, we're in an uncertain period, because he's at an event, and so we don't know how Trump is exactly going to react.
And look, just explain to us, so the Supreme Court has made this ruling. Is there a mechanism? Is that the final ruling on it? Is there any appeals, or is that it? There's nowhere else for Trump. He can't sort of sack them or change. Say I'm going to appeal against this.
This is the final word on using the particular legislation that he used, both for reciprocal tariffs and also for this, not so much relevant for our listeners, I suppose, but also on Mexico, Canada and China, to stop drug importing or drug smuggling, as he put it in his tariffs on them. It's the final word on that legislation, but there are at least three other pretty old but still in full power pieces of legislation that we know the White House has been looking at as a potential way of keeping the tariffs on, and so you'll expect to hear a bit more about that today or later.
So they might say, we've been building a contingency plan. The Supreme Court has ruled that this legislation is illegal, but we're going to try this as a vehicle instead.
Yeah, well, Trump obviously is never a man to admit defeat or even fault. So he's bound to come out and say, I still think that tariffs are the way to run the US economy, and we will have to try a different way because this Supreme Court doesn't, at least the majority doesn't agree with us. Some of them did agree with us. So expect that sort of response when we get the Trump response. But nevertheless, it's the biggest piece of Trump policy to come before the court. And there are a couple more on their way, ending birthright citizenship, for example, for the babies of illegal migrants. So I think it does show you that all the publicity, all the talk about this court being in his pocket has to be revised.
Gosh, so do you think he will seek retribution, particularly against the people he put in there?
Rhetorically, no doubt, but there isn't a lot else he can do than sound very angry and get the Capitals lock stuck on his keyboard again.
Absolutely. Things are serious and the caps locks are very much on. David, thank you very much for your time. Let's head back to our panel, Freddie Gray and Ava Santina-Evans. Freddie, this is, as you say, does feel like quite a big blow to Donald Trump. Tariffs were just such a key part of his proposition. He loves the word tariffs. It's a big part of his sort of economic strategy. What's he going to do next?
Yeah. Well, I think the reason I think it's a setback is that they have been working on this Plan B. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has been coming up with all sorts of ways in which they can put tariffs into other bits of legislation to get around this ruling, should it happen, which it now has. But the point is, a lot of the economic kind of warfare, really, that Trump has been waging in the last year has been directed at China. And Trump is going to China, and almost in amazing timing. I'm sure it was not deliberate. The White House sent out a press release that came out, I think, about 10 minutes after the ruling dropped, that announcing Trump's visit to China. And of course, the visit to China is all about trying to show China that America is willing to be very tough with tariffs unless they start softening on their tariffs, on their economic protectionism. And now the Supreme Court has taken away what Trump regards as his key weapon in negotiating with China. So it is a big blow for their foreign policy and their economic policy.
And Ava, do you think we are beginning to see some sort of cracks in Donald Trump's MAGA project?
Gosh, that feels like an enormous question. I think that the cracks of the MAGA argument are beginning to show, because it doesn't quite make sense to have introduced these tariffs in the first place, particularly because in doing so, you're appealing to a nostalgia for a world that no longer exists. The American Rust Belt is largely decimated. Manufacturing is not particularly consequential to the American economy. I'm sure there are a number of people who work in manufacturing who find that insulting, but in the grand scheme of things, and through globalization over the last 20 or 25 years, America has relied heavily on imports, particularly when it comes to steel and other products that they use to make their cars, or even in some cases to make their food. So actually the damage has been done to manufacturers rather than bolstering them, which was the original argument. So I think the entire MAGA concept is under the spectre of whether this concept could ever work. Even the relationship with China, you look at what China have been doing by buying up huge surpluses of treasury bonds over the last 20 or so years. If China were to pull those immediately, it could lead to the collapse of the US economy in its entirety, possibly overnight. So his strategy of being this large, bolshy figure who is cracking down on globalization actually doesn't have a lot of payoff for American people.
And Freddie, America will obviously be gearing up towards its midterm elections later this year. It does feel like the kind of, there's a lot of pressure on Trump economically at the moment.
Well, there is. And I think his administration and again, Scott Bessent in particular, the Treasury Secretary, were very keen on crafting this message, which was meant to crescendo just before the midterms. And that is that the golden age is indeed coming. And even though, Americans are not feeling better off at the moment, there are indicators that White House people will point to and say, actually, the American economy is starting to hum in very interesting and powerful ways. And they want to make this argument over and over And it's interesting that the Wall Street Journal, which has been very, very critical of tariffs over the years, has started to publish editorials saying, actually, the impact that tariffs appear to have had on the domestic economy is not as bad as we thought it was. And yes, it is bringing in enormous amounts of revenue because it is a tax. And so the Team Trump, if you like, were preparing to say, well, look, we got all this flack for tariffs last year, but it's actually working. And the American economy is starting to sort of burst into life. Whether that would have happened or not is a debate that we can have. But this ruling is a thorn in the side of that argument.